You are listening to N.A.M.E Broadcast Radio, serving top professionals from all over the globe, with our international host, Mr. Steve Barron.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to N.A.M.E Broadcast Radio. I am your host, Steve Barron. Thank you for being with us today. Listen, I have a special guest I want to bring on board in a couple of moments. But really, before I do, let me give you a little bit of insight, a little bit about him. Here he is a spiritual developer, development, self-discovery. He employs a variety of meditative and energetic healing techniques for the expansion of consciousness awareness. Has an M.A. in religion and religious education, spiritual pastoral counseling from Fordham University. He is a friend of mine. Let me bring him on board. It is Shiva Shankaran. Shiva, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
Terrific. Listen, I'm looking at some of the things that you do. I got to say, it's a very unique, really set of skills that you do provide. But before I really touch on that, let me dial the clock back a little bit. Tell me, how did you find your way here, if that's really the right way to ask that question?
In terms of doing what I'm doing, I would say as a boy, I was always interested in the deeper side of things. I grew up with some kind of a religious faith. My family was Catholic, but I was fascinated by the symbols, much more in the kind of mystical sort of traditions. And that sort of held my interest for quite some time as I grew up, into my 30s or more. And during that time, especially in my 20s, I learned various practices of meditation and became a regular practice of spiritual practice day to day, of meditating and seeking a higher awareness of myself, my inner nature, and the world around me, and the nature of all people in life around me. So it naturally drew me into studying a variety of philosophies, interest in sciences, as well as history and literature and philosophy, and spent a year in a religious seminary in my 20s, and left that, but then continued with my own spiritual work, and then eventually found myself at Fordham. And so trying to balance and bridge what I had learned about Indian and Vedic philosophy and some other Eastern traditions, and what I knew about Western Judeo-Christian traditions, and some indigenous things that were happening here in North America. And so eventually, over the years, I found a bridge. I found a bridge between East and West, which connected much of my early childhood upbringing with the Hindu in particular at first, and it has branched out a little bit to some other forms as well.
Okay. Now, you were saying something about the symbols. There are a lot of religions. I would not even be able to come close to probably the number of religions in this world. But when you're talking about the symbols, is there a connection through these symbols, in your view?
Oh, yes. I view the religion's various traditions as languages, almost. They grow up within the context of a place, a time, of certain people, their culture, and the lifestyle that the soil and the climate where they are determines. And so they tend to, like any language, the spoken languages, there are ways of translating from one to another to say very similar things, but with very different words. And the words are symbols. And same is true with various Christian symbols, with various Jewish and other traditions, the Hindu symbols, the Buddhist, the pantheon of deities and the Eastern religions. They open up certain aspects of the reality of our own consciousness and our deeper subconsciousness and deeper awareness and potential that are specific within those languages, but they can be bridged and they can be understood. and that there's a great deal of commonality. When you get deeper down into the metaphysics, into the study of being, you find that there is a common ground in almost every case, even between the monotheistic and the so-called polytheistic religions, or even the non-theistic Buddhist traditions. They all tend to find a place in an ultimate ground of being. And this is very fascinating to me because it speaks more towards human consciousness, what we all have in common, regardless of our place, where we grew up, our religious traditions or lack of. We all have something in common that is common to human consciousness itself, and that can be approached in a unique way that balances and that can speak to everyone and enriches all the traditions, enriches people everywhere, and really brings us closer together in seeing that we have much more in common than underneath the surface than all of the differences that appear on the surface.
Well, there is a lot there. Again, we're speaking with Shiva Shankaran. He is the owner, proprietor for the Center for Awakening Truth, Spiritual Development, Self-Discovery. Employs a real wide variety of meditative and energetic healing techniques. Now, I see here that you do have an M.A. in Religious and Religious Education, Spiritual Pastoral Counseling at Fordham University, the Governor T.M. program, and Grad Awakening Illuminated Heart Workshop. Tell me something about that. Tell our audience about that.
Well, I had learned Transcendental Meditation at the age of 20 when I was living in New York, and continued that practice and expanded it somewhat. By the time I was 23 or so, I was involved in doing that as a spiritual practice in New York in one of their centers there at that time, and pursued a number of advanced trainings with them, and including the TM Cities program, which is Maharishi's interpretation of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, great work of the ancient Vedas from India that Maharishi interpreted and cataloged and did a great deal of work to clarify for us. So these are beautiful, beautiful traditions that have been revived and brought into the modern world, in both their ancient scientific value and more modern practical form. So the Awakening the Illuminated Heart Workshop is something that one of my teachers, Drunvalo Melchizedek, has brought out. And this is extremely beautiful work about the human light body, the energy field, the Merkaba, and the difference between living in the mind or the head, which is where most of us still are, or living in the heart. And there's a profound difference. I personally feel that the human being was originally created, meant to live in the heart, that it would be the heart would be the center of awareness, and that this is where there's a unifying field where life can be connected. It's a field of core in the center of the heart. It's a field that is non-dual or unified. And the heart tends to know directly, have a direct knowledge, not necessarily understanding, but a direct knowledge of what is ultimately real. And that the fall in the biblical sense was actually a shifting. It was a drop in our energy, it was a drop in our vibratory rate, so that we lowered awareness, and with that we were no longer able to stay in the heart, and we lifted up and went into the head, so to speak. And the mind is a very different type of instrument. It's more one of understanding, does not grasp real knowledge so well, but it can understand in terms of opposites, so it's polarized. So the way the mind understands is distinguish the differences between the appearances of things. It can tell light from dark. It can tell up from down and left from right. But it is all in distinction with something else. It knows what is in terms of what it is not. And this is very useful. It's very important for the survival in the physical world. It's very useful understanding. But it does create problems in terms of us and them, mine and yours, these kinds of problems which pit people and things at odds with each other. We become competitors, grasping for our own piece of the pie, so to speak, whereas in the heart there's a deeper recognition that we are all the pie. It's quite it's a different world, but it was what shifted between, you might say, before the fall and after. And so we're living in this post-fall sort of world in our heads, and we have a great deal of competition and strife in the world today because we are all seeing ourselves as different from everything else. And if that makes sense to you, I hope that's clear.
Yeah, well, listen, it was very, very enlightening. There's no question about it. Now, I see you've worked with individuals and you work with groups. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Listen, we all live in this. We get up in the morning. We generally go about what our routine was the day before, and we're going to wind up doing it again tomorrow. And we come back and we go through the same routine. It's almost like a learned behavior. We know exactly where the cheese is at the end of the maze. But is there a time? I mean, am I to assume that there comes a moment of what else is there? Is this all there is? Is this something that people experience and that we're not aware of?
Well, Steve, that's a beautiful question. It's a very important question. You might say symptoms. I mean, we're not discussing a disease here or something. We live in a culture that tends to pathologize and make things, so something's wrong here. So we tend to have a sense that, well, as you said, there must be more. We start to have the thought that, well, this is interesting, but there must be more. And there are symptoms that we're starting to awaken to a deeper reality. We're starting to awaken to the fact that we're much, as human beings, we're much bigger and much vaster than we've ever been led to believe. We often are educated to be smaller than we are, less significant, not to make waves, just to get through and do the daily routine and just prosper, survive, advance, succeed, but in very limited ways. It's very material. So when we realize or start to become dissatisfied with that, that is a sign that there's something that's been subconscious, locked up within us, is seeking to come out and find expression. And for that to happen, it needs us to wake up to the fact that it's there and to open up to what it is that it might be wanting, needing to show us, to reveal that, yes, we are more than we appear to be on the surface. And I believe that there was, I've recently heard the saying that he who looks outside, without, dreams. He who looks within awakens. We can dream of a better world by looking outward, but when we actually look within and find a deeper reality, then we awaken to a world that's much bigger than what we have known before. And this is part of what this self-actualization, self-discovery, it's a big part of what this involves. It's learning to look within and to become sensitive to what's there and to actually pay attention. To pay attention and to give it value and not to just dismiss it as a fantasy or something meaningless or without value because, well, it's not necessarily what we learned in school, but really to pay attention to what our hearts, our intuitions, our deeper feelings are indicating, what our connection to nature and the earth, our connection to the sky and to the stars around us, that these are very real energies, and we're all part of this universe. We're not something separate from creation, here to just observe it or to live here for a while. We're actually part of it, and as part of it, we have a more important place than we realize. That's how I would like to sort of introduce this and just welcome you, welcome our listeners to knocking on that door and seeing, well, what opens, what's there.
Wow. That's I got to say that that was definitely almost trance-like, the way that you presented that. We're speaking with Shiva Shankaran. He is here with the Center for Awakening Truth. You work with individuals, you work with groups. Tell me how that can come to be to our listeners out there.
Well, with individuals, I like to take a little time, listen, get to know a few things, and to introduce a few little practices here or there that can help to guide people depending on where they are. Some people come to me, they've already experienced a meditation of one form or another, and they've been seekers for a time, and other people come just because they're just starting to realize that this is something new, and I'd like to learn something about this, and should I talk to someone about it? Should I just read books? And I encourage people to learn a variety of few different practices and to go where they can learn those. And I also teach certain energy processes that you can do on your own and that help to adjust the energy field, to get things flowing more, to release or heal physical, emotional difficulties just energetically, and a number of things. The tapping procedure, EFT, is something that's pretty famous, and a lot of people know it. And if you don't, I can teach that, and a number of other things. And the groups are very helpful in that they are somewhat community building, and they build a greater level of support. And it's also very valuable to share experiences and to hear what is happening from other people. And it creates a larger energy field as well. So I like working with both.
I'm going to get to some of that in a minute, how some of our listeners and the people out there can reach out to you really for some spiritual development. We all need it. I mean, there's no question about it. Look at the world today. Self-discovery. And there are a variety of meditative and energetic healing techniques. And I think this could be very beneficial to a lot of people who live stressful lives, who feel that there's always an emptiness. I mean, we were born with some form of spirit, I believe, based upon what you're telling us, and we need to awaken some of that. Now, I know you're in the midst here. You're in the middle of writing your first book, and the title you've indicated to me is A Science of Consciousness. Tell us a little bit about that. Don't give too much of it away, because we want some of it to be a surprise.
Well, I call consciousness, in the sense of science. Science refers to a field or a body of knowledge that's in some way verifiable, repeatable. This is not necessarily what we would call empirical science, but it is a consciousness or spiritual science. And that is to say that one of the things that we have in common as human beings is that there are certain patterns that are predictable, that we tend to move through in terms of the opening, expansion of awareness, depending on how we go about it and the methods we use, but there are certain patterns which are fairly common to everyone. We go through certain gateways, portals, what have you, that indicate a certain degree of progress and expansion and development. And these things are normal. If we're moving in the right direction, we're moving to greater fullness, a greater self-actualization. And it's also scientific in the sense that it's a broadly based awareness. And the way it reflects, as I was alluding to before, we don't live in this world or in this universe isolated. We are apart. You might say we're as above, so below. We are a cell in a much greater body. The universe has been explained to me by one of my teachers. If the Creator had a body, it would be the whole universe. I would say in this way it would be the whole creation, because I'm beginning to understand now, empirically, that our creation is a multiverse. There are multiple layers of coexisting universes within the same space, but they are on different frequency levels, different radio stations, all coexisting within the same atmosphere. And that we are connected to all of them, even if we're just tuned in to the one we happen to be in, the one world we're living in now. That's where our tuner is set. But these other ones are still there, very vibrant and very alive. And so it's all impacts on who we are. It's as if all of these interwoven frequencies make for the world the way it is, or if they sustain everything. We wouldn't exist the way we are here without all of this interwoven web, if you will, the web of life, the web of being, the web of awareness and consciousness. It's just that we are awakening to a much broader creation, and our place in it. And it's really an exciting journey. It's nothing really mystifying. It's just an exciting journey. It's what we're meant to be and to become. As human beings, we're evolving into a higher life form, which is increasingly more divine. And the divine is a level which incorporates all of it. So we're just awakening, really, to a bigger reality than we have known before.
I have no doubt that you are the person to turn to for this type of spiritual development and self-discovery. Shiva Shankaran here at Center for Awakening Truth. How do our members and listeners reach out to you? How can they get through to you? What's the best way for them to do it? I know you have some email address. You're with us here at N.A.M.E, and that's name-exec.com, and go right to Shiva Shankaran, and that's Shankaran, first name Shiva, Shiva, the Center for Awakening Truth. Facebook, any other email sources that you'd like our listeners to be aware of, and I'm going to let you turn it over to you to let them know.
Well, at present, that's still about it. The Facebook is a good source. The email address with my name at myfairpoint.net, and also the main page on N.A.M.E. Those are good ways to reach me right now.
Okay. Listen, you have close to 40 years experience in meditation practice. If you're reaching out to them and you feel like maybe your day has just become the same old drudgery each and every day, but there's always that burning feeling inside of you, there must be more. Really, he is, in my view, and him and I have spoken numerous times, and I'm always I'm never silent. People say that you're never silent. Well, when he speaks, I'm silent because there's so much information coming out, and I'm really trying to process it. Mr. Shiva Shankaran, that is the Center for Awakening Truth. You can visit him through name-exec.com. Type in Shiva, S-H-I-V-A, Shankaran, S-H-A-N-K-A-R-A-N, and that is the Center for Awakening Truth. I'm going to give you the last minute, the last word, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve. I'd like to leave our listeners with a blessing and an invitation, a blessing that we are all connected, whether we realize it or not. The fact that we're breathing, that we're alive, that the blood is flowing. This is a life force that is just streaming through the whole atmosphere. It's streaming through the space in which we live and breathe and have our being. And we're already connected to that. It's just, from our side, it's reopening to that awareness and to reconnecting to a more heart-centered life, living more in the heart, less in the head, being open to what information from within that brings to us, whether you work with me or you have some other spiritual teacher who can connect you or help you in this guidance. But everyone has their unique angle and their unique way of seeing things. It's like there can be many, many diamonds in the world, but they all have slightly different surfaces, different cuts, different size and shapes and angles to them. And depending on the angle, that's the way they reflect light. So we're all diamonds, and we are all unique in the way that we reflect this being through our own consciousness and our own awareness. And so it's a great journey. It's a great awakening. And it truly is God's work, but it's our work. It's our work to move to that and make God's work our own. So that's what I would like to leave with our listeners. And I'm open. I'm more than happy to talk about this. This is what I love doing most of all, is talking about this and working with people. So thank you, Steve.
Listen, it's been our pleasure. Shiva, I think you really have a lot to offer in a lot of different ways. Shiva Shankaran, here for Center for Awakening Truth. It's been my pleasure having you on. And when your book is published, The Science of Consciousness, we'd like to bring you back. And listen, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Steve. This is also my pleasure.
Okay, very, very good. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.